On today's podcast, we sit down with a good friend of ours, Mike Gormley. I've known Mike for many, many, many years. He's a great, great manager, very wise, very knowledgeable. We had a great conversation about the role of management today, the skill sets that one needs to be a good manager in today's landscape, the role of festivals in a career that's developing. So much great information, why it's so important for artists to be educated about their chosen career path in today's day and age. You really are going to want to check this out. Insiders, are you ready? Welcome to MUBUTV's Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage artists and music business professionals who are dedicated to having a successful career in the new music industry. Here are your hosts, Rich Ezra and Eric Knight. Welcome back, Insiders, to another episode of the MUBUTV Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage your music career. On today's episode, we sat down and spoke with veteran artist manager Mike Gormley. We discuss what level artists need to be at today before they're ready for management, how much more important it is for artists to be educated about their chosen career path, the role of colleges and festivals in developing a new artist's career, the skill sets a manager will need to build a career in today's landscape, and much, much more. You won't want to miss it. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Hey Insiders, are you looking to take your music career to the next level? Then you need to know about the Music Business Registry. The Music Business Registry is the leading music industry publisher of the most up-to-date contact information for major and independent record label A&R, music publishers, artist managers, music attorneys, music supervisors, and much, much more. The Music Business Registry is the trusted industry standard and source serving the music business community for over 28 years with the most accurate and up-to-date contact information available. Their titles include the A&R Registry, the Film and Television Music Monthly, the Music Publisher Registry, and the Music Attorney Registry. All of their publications are available in print, PDF, CSV, or online subscription. Visit them now at musicregistry.com and receive a 10% discount by using coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout. That's musicregistry.com, coupon code MUBUTV10. When you're ready to put your music to work, musicregistry.com.
Welcome back, Insiders. Today's featured interview is with manager Mike Gormley. I've known Mike for, such a long time. I mean, I remember when I first met him, he was at IRS Records in 1980, and I was at A&M, and they were both on the same lot. And Mike has had extensive experience as a record executive and as an artist manager. He's worked with the Go-Go's, he's worked with the Bangles, he's worked at, independent labels, he worked at Mercury, he's worked now as an independent artist manager for many, many years. And our discussion was interesting. Artist management is a very, very interesting field today. We discussed, what does it take to be a successful artist manager in today's marketplace? We discussed a lot of aspects of artist development, including the role that colleges and festivals take in building an artist's career today. And one of the more interesting things I thought, Eric, was when we discussed the skill sets that he felt you needed as to be a successful manager in today's market.
Absolutely. And, and you touched on it earlier about how the function of the manager role has changed over time because it has become so much more immersive than before. A manager before was only worried about a certain, areas. Now it's like it's doing everything. It's playing the role of the record label, the A&R, doing everything. And so that's changed. Also, it was just interesting that his journey coming as a music journalist and doing PR for all the labels that we mentioned, Mercury and whatnot, and how that helped him prepare to become an artist manager. Also, and one of the big things that we've talked about quite a bit on the show, how has streaming changed the game for artists in this new era? Because he's come from that old business model into this new business model.
Right, exactly. I mean, it was very similar to Michael Plen, who came from the era of, when we were in that model of selling things.
Right.
And we no longer sell things. We no longer have something to sell. What we're selling is much more ephemeral. So, the management side has to look at that and understand that from a cultural point of view as well.
Exactly. So with that, Insiders, sit back, relax, and enjoy our featured interview with Mike Gormley.
Hey, Mike, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
I'm very happy to be here.
Mike, you've been an artist manager for a long time, and I guess I want to begin with a two-part question with you. What is an artist manager today, and has the role or the function of a manager changed over time?
They're both kind of the same question in a sense, because in my case, a manager is oversees the entire career, kind of the CEO of the company, and the company being the artist and the artist's activities. I've changed to consultant, which diminishes the role a little bit. There's certain things I used to do I don't do anymore, but I'm still there to guide and to advise and to help with contacts and to in a way oversee the career, but not quite as intensely as the best way I can describe it. And I think a lot of managers are doing that. The role of manager, as I'm sure you've heard, has become very important because the manager is now doing a lot of what the record company used to do. I set up distribution, for example. Never had to do that before. I'm happy to do it, and so I can get an artist with material. I can connect with distribution and actually get it out there correctly. Distribution doesn't do marketing normally, but at least your material is available on every platform you can think of. And then there is the marketing side, which is my background and which I've always done with artists. If we go back to many years ago with the Bangles, who I signed when they didn't really have a name or a bass player at the time. And we did marketing intensely long before they were signed to a label, except for some independent labels that we worked with. So you built a career, and I'm still doing that. I'm still building careers, which is immensely satisfying.
Great. This is Eric. Mike, thank you so much for doing this for us. How did your experience as a music journalist and the head of publicity at labels such as Mercury, Polygram, and A&M prepare you to be an artist manager?
That's sort of interesting. It prepared me basically on how to deal with artists. I found I had a knack of getting along and communicating. A lot of times when I was working with bands when they were very new, like Rush or Rod Stewart or Bachman Turner Overdrive or other bands like that, they were fairly new when I met them. Not BTO really, of course, because Randy had been in the Guess Who. But so had to give advice, had to do some things that a manager would do. I remember on more than one occasion, managers would call me and say, "We're out here in Ohio or something. We got a situation. What do we do?" And I don't know why the manager thought I would know, but somehow we'd figured it out. And so along those lines, I learned how to deal with artists. I learned what artists had to put up with. But it was interesting because my first situation, if you will, as a manager was to help a band called Wall of Voodoo go on the road. I had never prepared a budget for a tour. It was just logical. Okay, here's what they're going to make. Here's what it's going to cost, and here's how we figure out to make those two fit together. So I learned on the job to some degree, but I was fairly educated on how to deal with the situations prior to that, just through my work with record companies.
Based on your experience today, Mike, based on what you had said before about transitioning the role from manager to consultant, you've worked with talent for so long, and I'm curious, do you find that new artists today or acts today are more savvy or more knowledgeable about the business than in previous eras?
It depends on the level. I've had artists who don't understand a thing about how it works, and I have artists who basically could do it themselves, but they're busy being artists, so they want me to help out with it. And each one has their ups and downs. Sometimes artists think they know how to do it, and they think they know what to do. And not that they're ever wrong about that, but they sometimes need some guidance they don't realize. So it takes a little conversation to point out why such and such won't work, or this way is better, whatever the case might be. And others just don't understand. But it's always been the case. Back when I was with A&M and this brand new band called The Police came to town, and I remember going to a party, and it was I can't remember what it was. It was some sort of media party or something. And as we left, Sting turned to me and said, "Why did we go there?" And I said, "I don't know. We'll find out someday." Meaning, well, the motto of my company is activity breeds activity. You got to be out there shaking hands and being visible. You may not know what the next step is about, but at least I know whether you should take it or not. And but I may not know specifically what will happen. I just know it's a good idea to be there, or a good idea to call this person, or a good idea to do something else, whatever it might be.
Given the far broader landscape that populates the culture today with DSPs, online social media, live events, video content, and other platforms, is there a certain level of development or a degree of market awareness that labels or managers even expect from music artists just coming out of the gate?
Yeah, I interpret that question as, should artists know that landscape? And it's surprising how many don't. It's great how many do. But the ones who do that, I mean, it's an overwhelming amount of work. Just, you may know how to do all of that, but it's really difficult to do it, and to do it effectively, because there's just so much out there. So part of it is maybe zeroing in on what you can handle. And if you can't cover everything, then cover some of the important ones at least, or cover the ones that are going to pay attention to you at first, and that'll lead to the others. It's just about organizing an approach. That's not a new thing. Obviously, you always had some sort of marketing plan, or should have had some sort of marketing plan when you were starting out, even 20, 30, 40 years ago. But this one now is pretty overwhelming, and I'm learning as we go along, because there's something new every day. And I find out about some outlet. I still believe in some of the old rules. I still believe in email campaigns, for example. People talk about, well, if you go on Instagram or whatever, you're reaching a lot of people at the same time, and you are, if you're really popular. If you're starting out and you have an email list of whatever length it may be, you're going directly to a person who said they like you. And you should be letting those people know what's going on as directly as possible. And, it used to be that a lot of bands always had a mailing list to sign as you left their show. And a lot of artists don't do that anymore. And I think it's wrong, because those people came to see them. Those people want to hear more about you. And therefore, you've won half the battle. And you should be getting their contact information. So that's an example.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I think that email is simply one of the most important tools that any artist has. Me as an independent artist, I live and die by that, because exactly like what you said, somebody took the trouble to come and see you at a show. You want to grab that email and, inform them about what's coming up next. Do we have another release or video coming out? And that's the most direct way to do that. So I do believe with you 100%. I don't think that's even an old school mentality. I still think email is the most powerful tool.
You have to be careful with it, of course. You can't become a pest.
Right. Yeah, there's a certain fine line that you have to do, a certain dance to it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Mike, given what you've said, and given the, I love the way you broke down the distinction between the element of, what's needed to be done out there, and the actual knowledge of doing it, and the enormity of that task. I mean, from your point of view, you've done this a while. How important is it today for artists to be educated about their chosen career path? I mean, you see both sides, but do you feel that that's an important element for artists today in terms of if they're going to pursue this professionally?
Yeah, they have to. They have to. Fortunately, there's all kinds of tools. There's all kinds of ways to look up. I mean, just Google, how do I start my music career? Something as general as that. You're going to find an answer somewhere. You're going to find some information somewhere. There are people who are teaching it, and there's all kinds of ways. But yeah, you've got to know more. It was always a good idea for an artist to know the business side. It was rare, but it was a good idea. Now it's necessary. You've got to know something about the business side. You've got to know something about marketing yourself. You've got to know, you can't just go, Instagram and whatever, it's got to be, it's just, and it is overwhelming. So, but like I said earlier, choose 5 social media platforms. If you can't get to them all, choose 5 and work on those for a while and build an audience. It's kind of like, and it's still somewhat true. If you play on a local area for 2 or 3 years and you build a fan following locally or regionally, you've got a leg up on when it's time to go national. You've got a fan base, and you can do that with the social media. You can build a fan base in a certain area and then go from there into other territories, if you will.
When you're seriously considering signing a new artist, what are the main non-creative qualities that you're looking for?
I would say professionalism. When you say non-creative, obviously you got to like their music, etc. But if the non-creative side is being some degree of professional, willing to listen and learn, and understanding the presentation. In other words, beyond the music, you've got to look good and have a presence of some sort, whether it's on stage or in the media, and you've got to, and that comes. I know that it can come from outside. I know some artists can be told what to wear and where to go. If the artist themselves know how to do that or have an inkling for that, it's you're working with somebody who's not just musically inclined, but obviously talented in terms of presenting themselves. So there's that aspect. There's just it's interesting. Sometimes I meet artists who know the legalities involved. They understand contracts, or at least to some degree. It's helpful. Whatever you bring to the party, if you will, is going to help you. The more you know beyond your music, the more you're going to be able to converse with people in the business. The business side is still quite a surprise to a lot of artists. When they get to a point of learning the business, a lot of artists go, really? That's how it works. If you can know that going in, that's out of the way. Now you know what you're doing. It's helpful to the manager and to anybody else you come across, that if you know what's going on.
You've been involved in managing artists for a long time, and today we live in a different world from a marketing perspective, and I'm curious, how do you feel streaming has changed the game for artists? I mean, in relation to like interactivity or analytics or what you can learn from it. Has it changed as far as you can see?
Well, it's yes, I think it's given them a much wider stage to play from. I get artists saying, well, streaming isn't paying. I'm not making any money. Well, you didn't make any money off radio airplay either, really. I mean, you did as a writer, but as a performer, you didn't. But once they got on the radio, everybody heard your music and your career started. This is basically the same. If Spotify starts putting you on playlists and it starts spreading that way, or YouTube or however, you're presenting your music and yourself to a lot more people, obviously, just like it did with radio. You may not make a lot of money off that, but that's the avenue. And now there's so many more avenues, which is good and bad. There's so many more avenues, which means you've got a chance to do more. It also means the impact is depleted somewhat because there's just so many platforms. But they're there, so you might as well make use of them. And so I see it that way, that it's kind of like radio airplay, I guess, even now. I mean, you still get on the radio. A lot of people are going to know more about you than they would otherwise. So streaming it, to me, is this basically, maybe not, and maybe could be analyzed more, but basically the same thing.
My next question, from a management perspective, how important is it to understand the culture of the audience that your artist connects with?
Understand the culture of the audience. That's an interesting question. In other words, know your audience. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Well, there's a certain amount of searching at a early stage because you don't know your audience. You're figuring it out yourself, but you learn by playing live. To me, that's the best way. Is you get feedback that way, and you get a feeling of what they're looking for, but you get a feeling of what they like. In other words, the greatest thing to do before you record a song or an album is to play it live as many times as you can, because not only does the song get kind of worked out then, but fans are reacting to it or not reacting to it. And the greatest way, if you can, is to play it live a bunch of times before you ever go in a studio. And that's the same. So that's learning the culture in a way, learning what they're about. Also, of course, you come from a culture. Your music that you're playing comes from your experiences in a culture, whatever it may be. And so you're going to go to those clubs and play there, and you're going to get in front of those people, and your friends are going to support you, and they're going to be of your culture. You grow out of the culture as well, but in the process you may well find either more people in that culture or a different slant on that culture you didn't even know about, which is only expanding your knowledge, and that's only good.
Michael, I want to ask you a question about management from the other side. I mean, you've dealt with a lot of managers when you worked at a label. What are the specific qualities you feel at this point, an artist who's looking for management and has people interested in them, what are the qualities and the things they should be looking for in an artist manager? Are there specific things that you think are important for someone to be looking out for?
You mentioned earlier about what artists should know. Artists nowadays still know a lot, and they also know bullshit when they hear it. And so if the old style manager is going to come in, and say, I'm going to make you a star, to be cautious. So managers now have to show, here's what we're going to do, here's who we know, here's what we can do for you. And if an artist doesn't get that information, they should be careful. And most artists know that now. They really know as I was saying earlier, a lot of them do know the business side, or at least some degree of the business side. And then you're going to sit with somebody, artist to manager, and you're just going to know if you like them or not. And if you don't like them, don't do it. That may be a little bit unfair, because who knows, the manager was having a bad day or something, but you're going to know if you can work with somebody, because you're going to be with that somebody, good or bad, you're going to be with that somebody for some period of time, 6 months, a year, 20 years, who knows? I had lunch with a guy the other day, friend of mine the other day, who's managed some of the biggest names for decades. They're with him because they like him, and so you can tell if somebody's, and if you've got any questions, you ask the artist, the manager, and you tell the artist what you're looking for. You tell the manager what you're looking for, and you can tell if the response is what you want to hear or not, and what you should be dealing with.
Yeah, I think that's really true. It's like a band. You guys are a marriage. So I think the relationship between the artist as a manager is kind of like almost like another marriage on top of the marriage that the artist has with their band. So it's almost like two different things going on, because you guys are sharing such intimate things. I'm sure the artist shares so many different things with you, the ins and outs of what's going on in their mind. And so, yeah, I definitely agree. I think I'm going to know the answer to this next question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Today, for you, is live performance essential if you're going to break an act as an artist?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There are certain genres that might get away with not being seen very much, but no, it makes all the difference. It makes all the difference for the band. It makes all the difference for the fans. Live shows still move you, still the music still moves you, hopefully. And that's important. And it's different than recording, and it's different than anything playing live. It's got a different personality to it, and that personality is part of your package that you're presenting to people. If you don't do it, they're missing out. The fans are missing out on a section of your talents that they probably love. So I consider it essential, yes, just as much as possible.
Mike, as I'm listening to you, I'm realizing you have dealt over your career with a large swath of different styles of music. And I'm curious, can you talk about the fact, or can you speak to whether or how artist development differs from genre to genre?
It's very subtle. I'll try, but I've worked very recently with a great country artist, and country is not my forte, and she was heading in some different kind of a direction that I knew anyway. And she'd been around. She knew what she was talking about, but some things had changed. So what she was talking about wasn't quite as accurate as it had been, and you had to adjust to a certain style that you may not know very well. So you're listening, but you're also advising that person on the updates going on around. And then I've worked with like right out, I don't know, punk band if that's correct, but it's they were put into a punk label. I thought they were just a good rock band, but people called them punk for a while. And it's another band anyway, and they, again, I learned from them, but I knew much more about where they were headed and made sure they got on the road. They weren't playing live except around their hometown, and now they tour the country. There are things you just had to adjust to in different genres, and it's difficult to answer your question because they're sometimes rather subtle. You sometimes don't quite know until you're faced with the situation as to what's different with that genre to another genre. But I try to stay within the range I know, and so because therefore I can give my advice and my experience, etc. But I have traveled into other areas, and it comes down to a lot of the same thing. So as long as I can help, I do it. But it's very subtle sometimes.
I ask only to the extent that, you look at, like what you mentioned, country, and that's a little different than perhaps, a rock act. But, there's certain elements with regards to the country audience, knowing the elements. I mean, they're very, very, very loyal in terms of, the artists that they truly love, as rock fans are. You look at rock as a live performance medium as being so much more important than whether or not they have, a streaming hit. And if you look at just the genres of music that stream well, rock isn't at the top of the list, but it's certainly at the top of the list live performance-wise.
Yeah, it's... You know what? I think, though, the live performance factor falls into any genre, anything. I mean, even DJ, they need to get out there and in front of people. It's if nothing else, it's a marketing tool, but it's also a musical tool. And they learn, as we were saying earlier, they learn from the audience. So it may be very different music. It may be classical music versus a rock band. And a lot of the rules and the approach would be the same.
Yeah, I think this perfectly segues into the next question. Today, how much of a fan base does an artist need before they can actually tour, in your estimation?
It's kind of a tricky question because if you don't tour, you don't get a fan base. So you've got to, I guess
what I mean in terms, because now bands or artists are building their presence on social media much quicker now, or hopefully much quicker. And so there's already kind of a base there to go off on. So I guess I'm kind of basing it like on that.
Yeah, I'm finding that a lot of times the streaming and so on and so forth takes a while to translate into selling tickets, to put it bluntly. A lot of times, people want to check you out. But it's the same as before. If you got on the radio before, people didn't know you. They came to see you one time. If you didn't win them over, you may not get them back. In this case, it's kind of difficult because if you're going to play in front of 5 people, and the first time I saw the Police, they were in front of 5 people. If you're going to play in front of 5 people, you play like you're playing a stadium. And if you and those 5 people are going to tell other people, and you build from there. I like it when a young artist, gets kind of a residency. If they can play the same place once a month for 6 months, let's say, and they're doing well, the word's going to spread. By the end of the 6 months, they're packing the place, and that then gives them a jumping off point to some other places. But of course, exposure, streaming exposure changes all of that. You, at the very least, can get on the road and get out in front of people and get enough money to survive. And if it works, you can do it a second, third, and fifth time. So it goes back to streaming being kind of like radio. If you're not, you can get in front of a lot of people, and they're going to come and check you out somehow, some way. And a lot of the podcasts and the YouTube exposure and so on helps that, because you can do that without traveling far, but you can't keep doing that. Obviously, you got to get out in front of people.
Yeah, and speaking to that, can you talk about the role of colleges and festivals in terms of building an artist's live career?
It's perfect, really. I mean, colleges haven't changed that much. I mean, there's been big changes, and they also haven't changed that much. You get colleges backing you on and playing your music. You can probably go to that town if it's within range and get in front of people and start expanding your base that way. Colleges still do that for you. They'll have you come in and play, and they'll have you. They'll tend to support you, and the listeners will tend to support you. So I find that's still a great way to get out in front of people. And festivals would be the same thing, but they're much more difficult to get on. You have to have, in most cases, most festivals won't book you unless you have something going for you that's going to help them sell tickets. And colleges will want to sell tickets, but they still are more interested in getting the band in front of people, and often they have a campus outlet to do that. Festivals, that's a bigger business. They've got to sell tickets to survive, and so therefore you have to help sell tickets. So you have to be a certain level most of the time to get on festivals. But if you can, and when you do, it's a lot of people. Even if you're the opening act, and the opening act conceivably at a festival could go on anywhere between noon and 5 o'clock. And there may be, let's say the festival is going to bring in 15,000 people, and you're only playing to 2,000 people. That's 2,000 people. That's 2,000 where you're normally playing
to who you were before.
Yeah. So they're great. They're great in helping spread the word. And you're also usually on a poster, and you're on the same poster as some other band, and it gives you prestige. It's kind of like, you might say it's good for the resume, but it's also good for getting your music out there.
Hey, Insiders, we hope that you've been enjoying our featured interview. Stay tuned because we've got so much more value coming your way. But before we dive back in, a word from our sponsor. Hey, Rich, you're the founder, CEO, legend of Music Business Registry. Tell us what the Music Business Registry is all about.
Well, what it's about, Eric, is it's a company that is designed to provide the most accurate and up-to-date contact information for the music business. So if someone is looking to reach the A&R community, if someone is looking to reach music publishers, if someone needs to reach artist managers, if someone needs to reach music attorneys, if someone's looking to place their music into film and television and needs to reach all the music supervisors, that's the contact information that we provide. We've been doing it for 28 years. We're sort of the industry standard, if you will, for the music business, and have been serving them since 1992. So that's what we do.
Amazing. So if I wanted to find out, let's say A&R people from Warner Brothers, let's say, I can just go in there and find that in the A&R registry?
Absolutely. You'll find all of the Warner Brothers in there. You'll find the Warner Brothers in LA, Warner Brothers in New York, Warner Brothers in Nashville, Warner Brothers in London, Warner Brothers, probably in Australia as well. So those are the main territories that we cover.
Amazing. And we're offering all of our insiders right now that are listening, if you visit musicregistry.com and use coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout, you'll get a 10% discount off your first order. That's musicregistry.com, coupon code MUBUTV10. Anything else you want to say, Rich?
Well, when you're ready to put your music to work, musicregistry.com. Mike, so much of this seems to be, I guess, about the role of, building fan bases. And I'm curious, can you talk to any innovative ways that you know of that can help artists build and grow their fan bases?
It's great if you can find an innovative way to do it. Unfortunately, I believe in the same old, not the same old, that's not a nice way to put it, but in the proven path of getting your music out there in front of people, playing live, try to get exposure on whether it's some of the great shows online, like there's God, I'm going blank on them. There's the Balcony Network. You can play from the balcony. There's just different ways of getting out there in front of people. And the innovative part of your question is the tough part. You don't want to come across looking cheesy or tricky or cute, and because that may work for a second, but you've got to be able to back it up. So unfortunately, my answer is the tried and true approach of recording, of promotion, of playing live, And now with the different outlets, getting on different outlets, whether it's YouTube or whatever, that gets out in front of people. While you're doing that, the innovation comes up. You find a different way, but I can't point one out right now because somebody out there has it.
The only reason I ask that is because today it seems that, so many artists or bands that just developing themselves and making music, it doesn't seem to be enough anymore if they want to survive. It seems that there needs to be all of these other elements. Social media is a part of that. Video is a part of that, like you mentioned, podcasts, but there's also other elements to it, like, brands and so forth. And I'm curious if, in your opinion, do you think, based on this, that artists today need to consider themselves a brand in the sense of their career, or is that not something you feel is right?
No, I think it's right. It never bothered me. I saw a commercial last night, or I think I can't remember. I think it was Jimmy Kimmel show or something. It's Sounds of Silence. It's the Simon and Garfunkel Sounds of Silence, and it's a Volkswagen commercial. And the entire commercial is the song, except at the end, Volkswagen emerges from the dark. And I know Paul Simon controls his publishing, which means he had to say yes. And it kind of surprised me that particular artist would let that happen, although it's very well done. And I guess nowadays the branding is part of it right up to that point. If you can get that kind of exposure, I don't see a problem with it. I'm going way, way back to I think the mid '80s. Oingo Boingo did a Budweiser commercial, Budweiser TV commercial. It's on YouTube if you can find it. And to me, it was a way. Yes, made some money at a point where we're looking for money, but it's also got the name out there. It actually didn't work that well with Oingo Boingo because they ended up playing the commercial I think about 3 times. But I don't think it helped, but it didn't hurt either. So the answer is branding. I think I've never had a problem with it. Of course, if you don't believe in a particular brand, don't sell yourself out to that. But I don't have too much of a problem with that. The big point, the question that I get asked almost all the time with a new artist is, how do we get funding? People now it's interesting that artists now know they got to try to find funding, whether it's GoFundMe or a rich uncle or whatever it might be. They're smart enough to ask about it. They're smart enough to go after it, and sometimes they get it and sometimes they don't. But funding is a big part of an artist these days until they've established themselves, and maybe even then. So you've got to look at branding because that's a source of funding. But like I said, if you're sober, you don't want a beer company funding you. But if you're okay with it and the crowd's okay with it, what the heck? So. I've never really had a problem with that. I understood, there was a time I understood that the image was not good if you did that. If you remember, there was a time when movie stars would make millions of dollars doing commercials in Japan.
That would never be aired anywhere else.
No, and they would not be seen here. And of course, now they're all over the place. It just, the perception changes. The movie star would have been seen at that point of some sort of sellout. Now it's just part of it.
And that's something that you and me and Rich have spoken about, that there was a time where artists wouldn't be caught dead doing any kind of branding. And now people are just going crazy for it.
Yes. It's funny. I look at that and I think, there's a different consciousness that breaks down not only economically. I think there is an economic factor to what
Absolutely.
Eric was saying. But I also believe that there's a different consciousness culturally to what Mike is saying too, that it's viewed in a different context. It's viewed in a broader artistic sense.
Right.
I mean, I remember, like you mentioned the thing, Mike, about the artists, if you're sober, not doing an alcohol or a beer thing. I remember when I read the endorsement deal that went down between Jack Daniels and Kid Rock. Now, any other artist, sober or not, that would have been kind of controversial because alcohol and cigarettes have always been controversial in terms of brand endorsements. But in this particular case, and it goes to what you said, the artist and his audience, that seemed like an authentic, genuine fit. That was totally legitimate. That, probably Kid Rock does drink Jack Daniels. He doesn't purport to be, a teetotaler. So in that case, I mean, it totally worked. It totally made sense. But there was a time when, Janis Joplin would never have done an endorsement deal, even though, people talk about she could have made millions endorsing.
Or licensing their music, Led Zeppelin.
Right.
I mean, and now you're seeing all these, tracks being licensed that are being licensed out, so.
To brands.
Bob Dylan, I mean, with Apple. I mean,
Bob Dylan with Apple, and Bob Dylan with, what was it? The lingerie, what was that lingerie ad that he did? The famous, was it Fredericks of Hollywood? I remember that. Do you remember that a couple years ago, Mike?
No, I'd forgotten about that. That's funny.
I just remembered it. Yeah, I mean, and everybody was shocked that, Bob Dylan did an ad.
Right.
I mean, he was the icon of this, and it just, that's part of my point about how the culture, beyond just the economic.
Shifted, yeah.
I mean, I don't think that the check Bob Dylan got was life-altering for a man at that stage of his career. But it just goes to show he even felt comfortable.
Well, I'm sure he saw the humor. If Bob Dylan, and I don't know him. I'm not saying this from personal knowledge, but if anything, he's going to love the unexpected, and him doing a Fredericks of Hollywood would be totally unexpected, and he'd probably get a kick out of it. Yeah, right. So, but the other thing interesting, you talk about how times change, and this may actually be happening. I don't know offhand, but tours or shows or bands could be funded. It could be branded by weed companies. Put that in perspective of how, if a band in the certainly 60s and up to the 80s and into the 90s had marijuana as a sponsor, they would have been banned from everywhere. And now, if they're not doing it, weed companies should be doing it.
Yeah,
because
and I'm sure that's coming.
Yeah, so it's funny to think how things have opened up to that point. Whether you agree with it or not, it's. I see billboards around LA to tell people, telling them where to go to buy some weed. It's funny. I just find it funny because it was such a dark, forbidden area for so long, and now there's billboards up. So why not get a band to tour?
Absolutely, and there are certain acts that totally lend themselves to that whole element completely. Yeah,
a hip hop act like Cypress Hill would be a perfect
Cypress
marriage
Hill,
of
or
that.
Grateful Dead or Fish,
Exactly.
or any of those acts that where that is part of the culture. Definitely.
Doesn't Snoop Dogg have a weed company now, or Willie Nelson does?
Probably.
If he doesn't,
or
he
Willie
probably
Nelson.
does.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what the hell?
Let me ask you, Mike, in terms of the profession of professional artist managers, what do you see as the skill sets future artist managers will need?
Certainly, organization. A business degree wouldn't hurt. What you learn in business school may not help when you're in the entertainment industry on a direct basis, but it's certainly an overall approach would be understood. But the understanding of social media and all that involves is necessary. I've had to learn it as I go along because I'm an old guy. And I'm not, I wasn't learning it in school or wasn't picking it up from friends. I had to go out and find out about it. Although my first computer I got, Steve Bartek from Oingo Boingo went and helped me buy it, and that was back in the 80s. So I started it early enough. But so anyway, knowledge of that because of the marketing aspect. So there's a marketing, the understanding of social media. The understanding, I guess, of even computers in general. But it also never hurts, and we got away from this for a while, it never hurts that you have an understanding of performing or understanding of songwriting or understanding of the art itself. And I found that out a long time ago, but a couple of years ago, I was convinced by a friend to go to a singing class. And I never thought of myself as a singer. And although I was in bands, but I yelled a lot. I didn't really sing. And you had to, at the end of the class, it was every Saturday for, I've forgotten, I think 6 or maybe more weeks. And you had to get up in front of people and sing. You sang karaoke, so you had music background. But it was fun. It was a little scary, but they had a kind of end of school recital, and they had to invite friends and family, and there'd be like 50 people, and you'd come out and sing. And I realized what it was like before you go on stage. What you're sitting you're back in the dressing room, you're about to be introduced. I learned what it's like. I had never experienced that, and not really. I mean, I was a drummer in a band. You're getting up, you're playing rock, you're having fun, whatever it might be. This was bare bones. I think the only more difficult situation would be stand-up comedy. Going out there, being introduced, and you're supposed to make people laugh. In this case, when you get up and sing, you're supposed to keep people from laughing. But but anyway, I'm just saying that that knowledge I picked up was I was amazed by it. I learned what it's like, and it helps. So if you have some sort of background as a songwriter, even as a hobby, or a musician, or you play something or whatever, that's also a great element to have, along with all the other business skills. It's an understanding you have that is going to help.
Absolutely. Mike, my next question, what has your biggest professional mistakes taught you?
Mistakes? Me? Really?
No, Mike's flawless. Never made one.
A couple have taught me to, unfortunately, to some degree, not trust everybody, because you think you're working on something with somebody who is your friend, and be careful, they may not be. And so that's that's too bad. That's a negative, but it's a good idea to be. I'm talking about having worked with some people for years who stabbed me in the back. I also be open to ideas. This is sort of embarrassing to admit, but I had the opportunity of creating a TV show. This would have been in the late '80s, early '90s, by a guy so major in the industry that if he'd said we're going to do it, it would happen. And he said we could do a TV show. And I said to my partner at the time, no, we'd rather do a movie. How stupid! I mean, we could have had it was an animated show, and it involved a lot of rock music and such. We could have had a series, even if it was for 1 year, we could have had a series. And we said, no, we want to make a movie. And of course, the movie never happened. So you got to be open to ideas. You got to think on your feet and be open to not closed on what you want to do. So you learn from those mistakes for sure. But you do learn from the mistakes. I mean, when I started managing, I came from a position at a record company right into management, and you could apply some of the things you learned. But like I said, I didn't know how to put together a tour budget, and fortunately it worked. But along the way, you're going to make a mistake, and just learn from it. There's nothing else you can do about it.
It's funny listening to you. I'm realizing there's so many experiences and people and stories like that, throughout all of our careers that we pick up over time. And I'm curious, for our audience, are there any great books that you would recommend artists read to educate themselves, or that you feel would be appropriate in terms of their own journey?
The books I read along those lines are not how-to books. They're books of experience. Patti Smith, I love her writing anyway, her songwriting, but I love her books. She has several books out, and one of them is just about how she got started and life in New York at the time and everything. And it's just wonderful, but it's also educational. Do
you remember the title of that book, just for our audience, just in case if they're interested?
It's something about kids. Oh man, I've forgotten offhand, and it's not far from me, but it's not within reach to.
It's about her early years with Mapplethorpe, and about a career, and I remember when the book came out a couple years ago.
Yeah, it's a great book, and she's won. She won National Book of Just Kids. That's what it's called, Just Kids. And boy, what other books? That's what the Robert Hilburn's book on Paul Simon is very interesting and educational, and how Paul Simon, all the early days of Paul Simon, I thought I knew about and didn't. There's great information in there about how he got started, and there's an interesting quote in there of, I think it's in the book or it's about the book. Paul Simon kept his publishing. Now, this is 1963 or 4 or 5, something like that. And artists, if they were going to get a deal, they basically had to give up almost everything just to say, okay, we're gonna make you a star, but you got to do this. Somehow he kept his publishing. And when he met John Lennon, that's what Lennon said. He said, how did you keep your publishing? Because it's worth multi-millions of dollars. I didn't know he did that until I read Bob's book. And he also has the John Lennon book, which is very good. You know, I like his writing and I like the books that he's doing.
Yeah, Breakfast with John Lennon, or Cornflakes with John Lennon, I think it's called.
Right,
yeah,
right.
Great book.
I like reading it and it makes me jealous as hell. But, because I was a journalist at one time and I think to myself, I should have stayed in that. I could have been doing these books. But, but I didn't. There's another mistake we can notch up. Well, no, it wasn't a mistake because I went on to some very nice things. But still, they're good books to read. But I don't read the kind of how-to books that much. Although I started a class at UCLA, which is still going, and it's about music management. And funny enough, I was thinking the other day that possibly would be a subject for a book because it involved not just teaching per se, but I would have guests come in and you would hear stories firsthand about what people were doing and that sort of thing. So that combination might make an interesting book. But those are kinds of books I read. They're knowledgeable, but they're telling you a nice story at the same time.
No, I totally agree. And having taught at UCLA as well, I mean, I know the value of that in terms of, bringing in experienced people who not only, can share their experience, but can augment a lot of the points and principles that you're talking about in the class. Mike, I wanted to ask you if in listening to you, it's so interesting because you have such a wide level of experience with so many different types of artists over the years. And if you could change one aspect of the music industry today, what would it be?
Well, it certainly would be that writers get paid. It certainly would be. Yeah, songwriters. I mean, that's just atrocious what's happened there. I don't know if it's going to get fixed. The deals were made between Amazon and Google or whoever's doing that sort of thing and the record companies, and the songwriters not making money. It's a crime. To me, it's a crime. And they're making some money, but they used to make good living. And now I know a lot of songwriters who just can't do that. They're out on the road. They're troubadours. They're playing almost every night of the week somewhere because of the love of it, but also because the checks aren't coming in from the publishers anymore, not to the degree of they used to. And I'm not even talking about millions of dollars. Sure, there are writers who made millions of dollars. There are other writers who had one or two hits and still made $100,000 a year for years thereafter, which is a nice living. So that to me it's got to change. It just has to change because after a while, no matter how much passion a person has about songwriting, they won't be able to do it. They just won't be able to do it. And then what are we going to do when that's gone? To me, that's the first thing that should be changed. There are others, but that's one crime that needs to be corrected.
Yeah, it's funny. I've discussed this issue many times with people, both from songwriters and especially in the business. And one of the most unfortunate elements about this is that when you probe into this issue that you just articulated about, these companies, is the fact that the three giant music publishers that control a majority of the policy of the business are owned by the record labels. And this is one of the reasons why this issue won't get addressed. I can't see, unless, you go way above the record companies and into the boards of these companies where they're going to say, we're going to take away certain amounts of money away from record companies and give it more to the songwriters and the publishers, or we're going to rebalance that. I can't see Vivendi saying, Universal Music won't get as much, and so we can give more to Universal Music Publishing. That's part of where I think a lot of these problems stem from, is that the control of both of those elements. And because I hear publishers talk about this all the time, about how what they get, and I'm talking big publishers, the Sonys, the Peers, the Warner Chappells. I mean, it's, saying how little the amount of money is, and this is the fundamental problem to why I think that problem occurs. It's not only at the songwriter level; it's also at the gigantic corporate level as well.
Right, and also, Apple and so on, who are the for a long time have been leaders of change and leaders of innovation. Why the hell didn't they make sure they were going to? I mean, I know why, right? They're a corporation, and they saved money by not paying as much as they could have, should have. They got away with it, and they're using people's music to build their brand, and they're not paying for it, or they're paying very little for it. That's just, I mean, I don't know how to fix it, unfortunately, but somehow, some way, and you're right, it's kind of a catch-22.
Well, hopefully with things like the Music Modernization Act that's starting to take place, that will start us on the right, track forward.
Right.
Mike, let me ask you, for our listeners that are professionals or that are aspiring professionals, what pieces of advice would you offer to someone who's looking to develop and have a career in PR and marketing?
Well, I was going to say education, which is, there's a level of truth. You can study it much more now than you used to be able to, the PR and marketing aspect. I guess the best idea is when you're at that level of being an intern, be an intern at a PR firm or a marketing firm. That's just where you're going to learn on the job better than anything. I had a weird experience. I was hired as head of publicity for Mercury Records, having never done publicity. I, to this day, don't know why they hired me. But on the job, I actually write about it I got a little blog in my website, and I talk about my first day on the job with 2 secretaries and a huge office and no idea what to do. And I looked out the window. This was in Chicago, and this is early 70s. I looked out the window, and there's the Playboy building. And the Playboy building had, the Playboy magazine at that time had a pass on something like 25 million readers once a month. And I just thought I should get to know those people, and called them up and went over, and they did a story on Rod Stewart. It was just logic. But here I am learning this, and I've got people working for me who know more about it than I do. I still don't know how it happened. But if you can do that, give it a shot. But for most of the time, you intern, you get into the middle of it all, you get experience, and you crawl in the mud if you have to, and then you emerge knowing what you're talking about. And I know so many people who are so very successful today who started at that level. And there's the old joke about the William Morris mailroom, right? Which at one time had a guy named Geffen in there, and another time, I think, who else was in there? But some pretty big, iconic. Yeah, Diller, that's who I was trying to think of. I mean, they started in the mailroom at William Morris. If they can do that, you can still do that today. You can still start in the mailroom or whatever. No, I guess there isn't a mailroom anymore, but whatever the room is, you start and you work and learn and listen, and eventually you move up the ladder.
Yeah. And speaking to that same question, since you've done a variety of different, careers in the industry, with that same question, what pieces of advice would you offer someone who's wanting to break into artist manager, for like any of our budding artist managers out there?
Well, there's a class at UCLA that I haven't taught there for quite a while, but I established the class, and it's about management. And there are a lot of schools now. I often wish that when I was starting out as a musician and then in the business, that these schools had been around, because what a gift to go to the Music Institute, and they're just all over the place now, and they're legit, and they teach business classes. It's not just music. So there is an opportunity to learn that's relatively recent. I guess maybe the last 25 years or so, a lot of these schools have emerged, and check them out, because from what I can see, they're teaching the right thing, or at least they're giving you the basics. So for you to, and from that might lead into an intern or a lower position that you're going to build from. But if you want to learn about it, and the other thing, as I mentioned, is just try to get a job at a management company. But unfortunately, don't call me because there's nothing available at the moment. But you can do it. And don't be afraid to approach people politely, of course. But if you can get them on the phone or certainly by email or whatever the case might be, and just say, here's what I'm doing and here's what I want to do, you just might catch somebody who says, sure, come on over. Get yourself out there. You're selling yourself all the time.
Are there any valuable pieces of advice you can offer artists who are looking to build successful music careers for themselves today?
Much the same. They have opportunities that a lot of artists didn't have in the past of learning not only their trade and their music and their whatever songwriting, whatever aspect they're after, but the business. The business aspect is there to learn as well. And the books we were talking about, it's so much more available than even a few years ago. Study them. It can be overwhelming. There's a lot to study. But don't lose your passion. Your passion is what drives you. Belief in yourself and passion. Sounds kind of cliche, but if you don't have that, you can't keep going. You gotta just believe in yourself. And but there are ways to actually be educated now, which was not the case not that long ago.
Yeah, I'm always telling my students along those lines, because I do teach at Musicians Institute, that I say, if you want a career or a life in this business, much like people that used to get one job in their life and have it for life, you can have that. But it comes with a caveat. And the caveat that I always say is that if you want a lifelong career in this business, you must become a lifelong student of this business.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think that that's absolutely crucial today, based on like what you were just saying, that, the classes, the reading, the articles, the internet. I mean, back in the day, all you had was Billboard. That was it. And if you didn't have $300 or $350 back then to get a subscription mailed to your home, good luck. You didn't have any information. But today, you don't even have to leave your home to get all of this. It all comes to you. So it's almost like, the bar has really been raised for artists, and there's so much information available for them. And like you say, Mike, it's overwhelming, but it is there for them. It is there to learn and to grow from. And those opportunities and those relationships, are there. So it's just a matter of educating yourself as to what's available for you.
Absolutely. And you're lucky to have it. And it's kind of like more homework to do. That's a drag, but it's fun homework.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, I appreciate your asking. It's a good thing it's coming to an end, because I didn't take Eric's advice and get a glass of water, so I'm starting to lose my voice.
Thanks so much, Mike.
Thanks so much, you guys. Great show. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful interview. It's funny. I've known Mike for a long, long time. When I first encountered him, I didn't know him. It was many years later. I first encountered him when I was an intern at A&M Records, and IRS Records was on the lot with us, and he used to work for IRS at the time. He worked with Miles Copeland, and I remember, he would call into the office, and the assistant would always go, Mike Gormley on one, Mike Gormley on one. So I always remembered that name, and then
Mike's great.
he went on to manage the Bangles and many, many other artists. But as you can tell by listening to this, I mean, he really has a lot of very, very, very interesting things to say. Some of the most interesting I thought were that, this is a guy who's been at it a long time. And when he spoke, what really got me is when he spoke about how artists today need to be educated. And this is something you and I have talked about so many times on this show, and we will continue to talk about. We're no longer in the era where artists can just focus on their art. And unfortunately, for better or for worse, they have to I'm not saying they have to have a PhD, but they have to be educated.
Right.
And there are so many tools to do that today.
Exactly.
You have to be immersed in this world.
Right.
You have to be really, really immersed and knowledgeable about what you're doing. Again, not to the degree that it takes away from your music, but you have to understand what you're doing. You have to understand where you want to go, and you have to have a plan.
Right.
And, it's rare now that, people are, completely educated, but unfortunately it's essential.
In this era, you have to be educated because you no longer have the infrastructure to support the way it was. It was,
That's
was
right.
once. And so I think, he talked about, you can search online. I mean, our show, there's plenty of things that you can find on getting started. But yeah, I think you got to hit the ground running when it comes to this immediately.
And you got to, and it's not necessarily about it being a drudgery or, oh God, I got to study now.
Right.
It's about incorporating this kind of thing into your life. It's about, we have always said on this show that if you want a career in music, it must be a way of life.
Absolutely.
And this, interview was kind of like proof of that.
Right.
This is what he's talking about. It's absolutely essential.
Yeah. I thought one of the other areas where we talked about the non-creative qualities that you look for on clients, some of the basics, having professionalism, but a lot of people don't realize that. You got to have your shit together. Willing to listen and learn, which I think is a big one. Not everybody knows it all. And understanding the presentation of what they're doing.
That got
was
me
crucial.
too. Yeah, that one got me too when he talked about, understanding the presentation, not only of themselves, but of their art.
Right.
It's not just about sitting up there, and playing a guitar.
Right. It's about sitting there and thinking about it, walking through every step of the show. What are you going to do here? What are the cues?
Exactly. And if sitting up there and, playing, with your guitar is your art, okay, great. That was Bob Dylan's thing, but, he had the most phenomenal material to back that up. So that was his presentation. But he at least thought it through. That's what and who he was. So you got to give thought to that. And especially today, Eric, when you talk about presentation, because, like we've talked about so many times on the show, we're in an era where there's so much coming at us. We have so many options, and therefore our criteria as a culture has changed in terms of what we're willing to give time for.
Exactly.
And what we're willing to pay attention to in terms of the presentation.
Right. And
that's really important.
And it starts again with the great music. If you haven't hooked them with that great music,
you got to have great songs, and then you got to learn how to present those great songs in a compelling or a unique way. We had Pete Anderson on here, and one of the things he spoke about was the future he felt was about getting theatrical presentations.
Right.
That's
and the immersive experience.
Absolutely. Much more
Especially
so.
with VR coming and everything, that's definitely really important. And then I liked what he talked about with, innovative ways to grow your fan base. He was from the old school of like the proven path of just recording, playing live, touring, getting out there and promoting it, and also using other vehicles like other niche shows that would, kind of cater to your music and trying to get on those. And he talked about not looking cheesy, and what I kind of thought by that is the aesthetic, which is something that we don't talk about. There's got to be a certain aesthetic to what you're doing, and does that fit? And is it, like what he said, for lack of a better word, is it cheesy? And so I think that's a real important aspect that he brought with that question.
You can word that in any way you want. I've heard that worded as, presentation. I've heard it worded as your image.
Correct.
I've heard it worded as, the way that you come across on set. There's all kinds of ways to do it, but you have to think about that. When you think of like the great, think of Prince.
Right.
There's somebody who knew who he was and what he wanted to project.
Right.
And everything about his music, the presentation, the image, the identity, the look, it was very, very consistent. It was thought out. It wasn't just haphazard, And that's a very, very important quality. And the whole thing of, staying away from gimmicks, because they can be like a little mini bump, and then, but it's the long-term effect of something like that. You're looked upon as like, oh,
right.
Yeah, they did that gimmick, or they
exactly, and then they're known for that as opposed to being taken more seriously.
Right, they're viewed forever in that. Oh, they were the one that did that like stunt, and it
exactly. So you want to avoid that. And I think the final thing, for our managers out there and our burgeoning managers, skills for managers of the future and what they need. And I thought this was a really good point. I think getting a business degree and having that business background. Not that you're going to become an accountant, but I think that part of that is a good idea if you're able to do that. Understanding social media and the importance of that, that's absolutely crucial for any artist, manager, anybody that's in the game. If you don't know your social media game, you're completely out of the loop. Computers and technologies he mentioned. And then, of course, the tried and true thing, the performance and the songwriting. It all gets back to the songs. Without the songs, you have nothing.
And you know what I thought was so interesting about that point that you just made, Eric, is that he mentioned that as something that so many managers today have gotten away from.
Yeah.
Not understanding the performance, not understanding the art form.
Because they're being inundated from so many other areas, I guess, but that should be, rule number one out of the gate.
Exactly. Really understanding that. And, what I would add to that, too, is that the great managers really have an understanding of not only the marketplace, but of culture.
Right.
Especially the culture of their artists. Remember, art doesn't operate in a vacuum.
Exactly.
You have to really understand that. So that I thought was, some of the most important qualities that he spoke about.
Hey, Insiders, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We really appreciate it. To get show notes, links, and everything that was mentioned during this interview, head on over to our official website at MUBUTV.com/podcast/show notes. If you're enjoying the content and what we're doing here on the show, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts from. And don't forget to rate and review our show over at iTunes. 5-star reviews are always welcome and help to ensure that our podcast stands out on the top-rated and new and noteworthy charts on iTunes in our space. You can also find us on social media at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all ending with the handle MUBUTV, which is spelled MUBUTV. Don't forget to catch our flagship show, the MUBUTV Insider Video Series, airing every week on YouTube at youtube.com/MUBUTV. This show was produced and created by Rich Ezra and Eric Knight. This show would not be here if it weren't for our amazing team, which are the following: interview editors Sarah Nissenbaum and Alex Taylor, show notes and transcriptions by Jani Chang, Nicole Capodoglo, Lilia Owens, and Sarah Nissenbaum, theme music by Disciples of Babylon, and be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the MUBUTV Insider Podcast.